I'm Brian Freise alongside Laura Duncan, and you're listening to the Triggered and True podcast. This is a podcast that's all about you, discovering you, going back for you, being with you. You're more than the pain you've experienced, the behaviors you're expressing, and the thoughts that run through your head. Together, we will find your true self, which has always been with you. It's just been covered up. Tune in as we show you how to feel your pain, get comfort, and go play as you return to you. It's time to transform from triggered to true. So hello and welcome everyone to this episode of Triggered and True. This is episode 33, and it is entitled Emotions Are Not Your Enemy. Today we're going to address a concept that many people have been taught consciously or unconsciously, that emotions are not their friends, that emotions are deceiving and they're out to get you and you need to suppress them and rule over them and all of that. And we're going to be kind of attacking that issue or that lie, if you will, head on. And I also really encourage you to listen all the way to the end. Because I share a very personal story in this area, and I think it is one that'll give you a lot of hope, and that you'll find comfort in knowing that there's hope on the other side of these some of these big, painful emotions that perhaps you've been suppressing your whole life, that you've been trying to avoid, and perhaps you're listening to this podcast because you're recognizing that, hey, I can't ignore this anymore. These emotions inside of me that I've been not paying attention to, I just can't ignore anymore. So yeah, listen all the way to the end. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the ride. Hello and welcome everybody to this episode of Triggered and True. Hello, Laura. How are you doing today?
Doing good this morning.
Do you have anything special you'd like to say to our listening and viewing audience this morning?
Just really enjoying the process of being able to share the compassion method with everyone. And just as we keep getting deeper into it, it's kind of fun to be able to have this podcast to be able to do that.
Yep, I agree. And it's been really fun talking to some people that are avid listeners and hearing how it's impacting them, because it makes me feel like it's accomplishing something.
Yeah, exactly. I think for speaking for both of us, I think that we're doing this because we want to get the message out. And so when you have those listeners that are asking questions and, participating, listening, applying, it's really exciting.
Well, there's also an ulterior motive for me.
What's your ulterior motive?
I have a selfish motive because I learn a lot by doing this myself. So
keeps things relevant. Yeah.
Yeah, I learn a lot from you as we go
that.
through it. So that's my ulterior motive. Now everybody knows.
Everybody knows.
All right. But anyway, so this is episode 33. And today we're going to be talking about how emotions are not your enemy. And perhaps it's just me, but I definitely grew up looking at emotions as something that was a sign of weakness, and that brave people, strong people, did not show emotions, except maybe at a football game. That's cool.
Yeah.
The football game's cool. And maybe even crying at the football game's cool. But in any other place, it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal.
Yeah. There's definitely some areas that emotions were okay, in my childhood growing up too. But many times emotions were seen as, messy, uncomfortable, overwhelming. And so it was difficult to feel them or be comfortable enough to feel them.
As I think about it, there were actually a lot of emotional reactions at the football game, at the TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
TV. It's because they can
outlet.
Hear you. Yeah, they can hear you and what you're trying to coach them to do. So
that's actually a really good point, because sports brings out a lot of big emotions in people. But it's almost like that's an appropriate way to get those emotions out. People have a lot of anger, they'll have a lot of excitement, they'll have a lot of emotions coming out, because that was a place where parents and potentially children were able to connect in that.
Yeah. So we have identified there are a few safe places in society where it's okay to show emotions, but by and by, in a lot of aspects of life, we are trained consciously, subconsciously, that they're not your friend, and you need to master them, so to speak. So today we'll be talking about learning to feel your emotions, and we want to start off with a listener question that I think is a good segue into this. And this comes from a person who says, she says, I'm pretty new to your podcast and the compassion method, and I'm working on my own triggers, which have caused through the years a lot of physical and emotional reactions. And as you explain, these are likely due to pain and unmet need in my past. My question is, why do I experience these reactions upon waking in the morning, or when I'm worshiping in church, or enjoying a coffee with a trusted friend? And what's really confusing to her is why is she having these reactions when she's not triggered?
Mm-hmm.
There isn't like something, specifically triggering her. They just kind of come up out of nowhere at times where, she should be in a peaceful environment. And she also goes on to share how she has recently moved to a new area and kind of gone through a major life change as well. So there's kind of all that going on as well. So kind of how would you answer that question?
Yeah, most of the time our pain manifests through a trigger where we, something circumstantial, potentially like moving to a new area. That could be something that could trigger pain and unmet need. But like she's describing, a lot of times we will experience pain, but it's not always connected to a circumstance, or it's not connected to a trigger, because here we are sitting here just having a cup of coffee, enjoying ourselves, and then pain is actually coming up. And most of the time, I think that comes from, like what we're talking about today, of not knowing how to feel your emotions. So there's a backlog, or there's a suppression happening. And so it gets suppressed and suppressed and suppressed. And yes, it kind of bubbles up and comes out as a trigger where all of a sudden we have a big reaction to something because of suppression. But if you kind of think about, if something's been suppressed for so long and it starts coming up, it's going to start coming up with any type of emotion, with any type of heart connection, whether that's a positive heart connection, or a joyful heart connection, or if that's a painful heart connection. So being able to recognize it's not always limited to just circumstances that we're going to be triggered.
And when I was listening or reading her question and thinking through it, one of the things that reminded me, or I was reminded of when I first started working with you, and you talked about how my emotions had to get louder and louder and louder until I would listen.
Yep.
And then you also talked about how I had built these systems in my life that we call protectors, and we've done several episodes on protectors, that I had built to try to pacify or take care of or massage my emotions so that I could avoid them.
Yeah.
And how just a real easy one to think about, and I think a lot of people can understand, is exercise. So exercise is definitely one of those things for me.
Yeah.
If I'm feeling anxiety, whatever, go work out. There's a medical thing, there's a chemical thing happening, the endorphins being released, but also it just takes your mind off it, clears your head. And then you're kind of like, I just had some medicine. Now I'm okay.
Yeah.
But I never really addressed the root of what was causing that emotion to come up. And one thing that jumped out on me is when, maybe when she moved to a new area, any systems she had built in her old area, in her old life, that she had taken to kind of assuage those emotions and ignore them, like so many of us do. Now those are gone, and she's starting over, and her heart's probably kind of like, hey, the way I used to pacify myself, I can't do anymore. And now I'm in this kind of new environment. So, that's potentially. So one of the things that I learned from you that I was so thankful of happened is that I recognized that a lot of people go through their entire life building more and more elaborate systems to take care of their heart without actually dealing with the feeling. And you can potentially go through your whole life and never really address the issues of the heart, your emotions.
I even like to bring that up with people that are even in the healing process, that are familiar with the compassion method, myself included. How there's certain things, you were talking about it before we got started, we were catching up on life for a minute. And I was saying how, this, certain situation used to bother me, but now, it doesn't even bother me at all. And you jokingly said that, like, oh, well, that means you either took care of it or you just numbed it. I was like, probably the combination of both. And so, so it's like sometimes you
Thanks.
can relieve some of the pressure, so it's not this big trigger when these things happen like it used to be. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I took care of the need behind it or the pain behind it. I just got used to it, accepted it, numbed it, pushed it down. And I think I said to you, like, it's just part of life now. You just, this is what you have to do, which is definitely more of a numbing comment than a connected comment.
Yeah. Yeah. How subtle. That just shows, even if it can happen to you, how subtle
Yeah,
this can kind of
exactly.
sneak up on us.
And not even paying attention, and even kind of like not priding myself, but maybe a little bit, and being able to say like, yep, I'm good now. Like, this used to bother me, now it doesn't. And
I'm a
that
big
kind of,
girl now.
yeah,
I'm a
I'm a
big
big
girl
girl.
now.
I can go on responsibility. It doesn't even phase me. I have zero emotion.
That sewage backup that you were dealing with, because we're going to get
Exactly.
specific about
Yeah,
what was going
yes.
on in her home.
Literally, yep. Having plumbing issues,
The
and then
plumbing
just being
issue
like,
going
no
on.
big deal, nothing, nothing even fazed me. But
Yep.
that also brings up a thing that says that if we don't have emotions, we are actually healthy. There's so many people that will say, and they'll even ask me personally and say, do you get triggered still? And I'm like, yes, I do. And they'll kind of be like, oh, I guess it's not working for you. And I'm like, no, we need to be triggered because that shows us where our pain is. We're going to get triggered for the rest of our lives. And not because that's a problem of unhealthiness, but that's actually a healthy brain reaction so that we can deal with the pain that we have. So the absence of emotion is not health like many people think.
Well, and when I think about back to the, what people do to assuage and not feel, and the protectors, and I was thinking of how, as you get older, a lot of times those systems that you build get more and more elaborate.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you recognize, like, sometimes you look at older people and you'd be like, they have some really weird idiosyncrasies, at times you
Yeah.
can kind of see, and it's like, well, that is a lifetime of having to
Mm-hmm.
build more and more elaborate
Yeah.
ways of trying not to feel.
Yeah.
And in this process, one of the things you shared with me that I will never forget, you said that your hope, what you hope happens in life, is that your heart, your emotions get loud enough to overwhelm the
Mm-hmm.
systems that you built
Yeah.
to not feel.
Yep. As uncomfortable as that is, that's what we want. Because if they don't get loud enough, we'll never listen.
Right. And that's a hard thing, because that means you're going to go through some
Mm-hmm.
very, very difficult processes, which for me, I came to affectionately call my Great Awakening.
Yeah.
So I'm so thankful in hindsight now that happened,
Mm-hmm.
because if it had not, obviously I won't be doing this, but I
Yeah.
would be continuing to build more and more elaborate
Even if
systems.
you were able to manage it, even if you're able to be able to like survive in it, you're thriving now in life. It doesn't mean you don't get triggered. It doesn't mean you don't have pain.
Doesn't mean I don't still have my systems.
Exactly. They're still there.
I'm much more
Subconsciously or
aware of it.
consciously.
I'm
Yes,
much more aware,
exactly. Yep.
and I
But
can,
you're able to like have more of a life of abundance in this way versus when you're always trying to protect your pain and avoid your pain. It gives us a life of suppressed pain, which is always going to have those big reactions and or just being numb and disconnected.
Mm-hmm. No, that's 100% correct. So the next question I have for you is that obviously, as we've been talking about, many view emotions consciously and unconsciously as the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of talked a little bit about it, but just maybe share a little bit more about why this is.
Yeah. So going back to the beginnings of many of our lives in our childhood, if our parents didn't know how to handle emotions, express emotions, encourage us as children to be able to express our emotions, then we are going to see them as bad, wrong, the enemy, something that's trying to cause us to, not be able to live the life that we want to live or the life we're supposed to live. And so we start to feel like these feelings because we don't know what their names are. We don't know what they mean. We don't know where they came from. And we're overwhelmed by them and confused by them. And it feels like it's happening to us with no navigation system, without any adult or any education being able to say, this is why we feel what we feel. And it's okay to feel it. And I'm going to create a safe space for you to feel this emotion where you're going to receive understanding, comfort, and connection. for many of you listening, how many of you were you able to have that environment in your early childhood development where you were able to say that emotions were helpful, emotions were leading us towards connection, emotions were teaching us and showing us things. I know for myself personally, I didn't have that in my early childhood development. It was that you could be happy or nothing. Those are your two options. Just be good and quiet and don't say anything, or be happy. Two choices. And so it really limits you because, as we
I
all
would say,
know,
in my home there, that choice of being happy wasn't really there either. Because if
I
you were
wasn't
too,
even there either. Yeah.
if you were too joyful and giddy, you were told to like shut up, chill out.
Yeah.
That's like
Yeah. Because too much energy, too hyper, the emotions make parents uncomfortable. Yeah. So you didn't even have joy. You're just neutral.
neutral. Neutral was kind of the norm. Yeah.
Yep. And then you're praised for it and, accepted for it. And you're a good kid because of it but really inside, you don't understand what's going on with you. And you were feeling things. You just didn't have any help or any name for it.
Would you say in a lot of cases too, I don't think I'm alone in this, but there was shame connected to the emotions.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So there was actually even another step, because if those
Mhm.
emotions brought disconnection with your caregivers,
Yeah.
that brought shame. And then it was like
Mhm.
they were like doubly bad. Because like
Yeah.
you've talked about, you need connection with your caregivers, like you need water,
Yeah.
when you're a kid, like you
Survival,
need
exactly. You
oxygen.
need that. Yeah. Food and water comes like in an emotional sense. That's what you need from your caregivers. If you're not getting it, you feel like you're dying. And it sounds dramatic as an adult to say that about a child, but that's what it feels like when you're little. You feel like you are dying because you need that connection. And then that shame says it's who you are. I was a pretty good kid, did the right thing, and I was either happy or neutral. And I did the system I was supposed to do in my home, so I did pretty good. But I had some siblings that couldn't control themselves, that couldn't be, either neutral or happy. And so what happened with them is I would see that secondhand. And I didn't necessarily personally feel shame because I didn't act out like that. But when my siblings did, I could feel the shame of that. In my mind, I'd say I don't ever want to act like that. I don't want to cry like that. I don't want to get angry like that. I don't want to have those big emotions because you get in trouble and you get disapproved of and you get disconnected from. So mine was a little bit more secondhand than direct.
Yeah. I think when I think about it, a lot of my shame was connected to the emotions where I was more sensitive. Because I think,
Mm,
we've identified my true self. There is a lot of
yeah.
sensitivity there. There's a lot of softness,
Yeah.
but in my mind, that was connected to being weak, all those
Yeah.
different things. So that was like shameful.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's a great, I like hearing both of our sides of it because we see it all from different angles. We experience it in different ways.
And would you say there's a difference? I mean, obviously, I have a male perspective, you have a female perspective. Do you think that it would be just cliche to kind of say that our differences are as simple as, male, female? I mean, but do you see like an actual difference in how male and female have been trained to deal with their emotions? Or is this just more of a kind of a stereotype? Or is there like actual
I
fact
think
to
it's
it?
more stereotype than it is. I think there's fact to it in the sense of that was your upbringing. And if you did a survey of 100 people that were born in your time period with similar, you know, Midwest parents, different things like that, you might see some similarities in that where there wasn't a lot of men that were able to feel their emotions because it was more, it was
So
put down.
perhaps
Yeah.
it's more cultural and
I think
demographic
it's more
than.
cultural than it is just male and female, but it
Mhm.
is factual that many men weren't able to be sensitive because that wasn't an acceptable emotion during that time period. But you see kind of as our world's changing with this next generation coming up with my kids, I noticed that I have 3 daughters and a son, and I noticed my son has a lot more cultural acceptance as a man to be able to feel more sensitivity and more emotion than I think that we did as we were growing up. So I think it is more cultural, environmental that impacts that because really, male or female, we have the same brains. Like we will process information different with male and female, but I think a lot of times it's just females in a lot of situations were able to feel more emotions. It was more acceptable. It was more, you felt less shame feeling those emotions, and men in general felt more shame feeling those emotions, and less teaching and less understanding.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what then is the purpose of our emotions?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the purpose of our emotions is to be able to know ourselves ultimately, because our emotions are telling us. It's like, think about like if you like fresh bread was baking and you smelled, fresh bread baking, and then you brought it out and you cut it and you ate it and you had that experience with it. Well, that is an emotional experience. It's a felt experience. You're engaging your senses, you're having an experience with that, and it helps you know what you like and what you don't like, and how you feel about things, and who you are. And so it's very connected to who we are. Yes, it also helps, our emotions help us to be able to connect with our pain and be able to connect with caregivers and be able to receive the things that we needed. But at the end of the day, the primary reason that we feel emotions is actually to know ourselves.
I wrote down my answer to that question was, it's how our heart communicates to us what is happening in our inner world.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's exactly. And so in that, being able to communicate to us, it's telling us our story. It's telling us how experiences uniquely impacted us as an individual, because no one will experience the same situation in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And when our heart's able to tell us through our emotions how we experience something, we get to know who we are in the midst of that.
Something I read in a book, I think it was from this guy named Ray Light. And he talked about in his book, I can't remember the name of the book, but he talked about how that your emotions, people are like, you can't trust your emotions. People say that all the time. You can't trust your emotions. But what he shared was, your emotions are 100% reliable to tell you what your heart is feeling in that moment.
Yeah.
Now, what your heart is feeling might not be logical because it's triggered.
No,
It's triggered.
exactly.
We've talked about how triggers aren't logical. So it might not be,
Exactly. And
there's no
emotions aren't
actual,
logical always. You know what I mean?
right.
Because emotions are a different part of our brain.
Yeah. 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 The right side of our brain versus the left
Mm-hmm.
side, logical side of our brain. And as we know, when we're triggered, it's not logical.
No, exactly.
It's kind of the definition of it.
But
So
even though they're not logical, they still carry intel. They
yes.
still carry wisdom. They still carry knowledge. We like to really say like emotions are just these kind of like bratty little kids that are throwing fits that we need to manage, and they're just annoying us and causing our lives not to run the way that we want them to run. And then our logic and our intellect is this wise, like successful part of ourselves. But emotions are only like that because we haven't listened. Think about a kid, that nobody ever listens to. What is he going to be? Bratty, annoying, all those things, because we haven't been listening. But if we actually honored the child and believed they had true intelligence and they had true contribution to the world, and that their emotions, being the child, were valuable, we'd be able to actually learn so much from them. But instead, we just label that they're just bad and wrong and messy and uncomfortable.
Deceiving. I hear people say a
deceiving.
lot.
Exactly.
Deceiving.
Yeah. That's very common in the religious community, that they're going to deceive you, and I feel so bad because they're not trying to be, deceiving us. They're actually trying to get our attention to tell us a very real story. But because it's not logical, or because we don't understand it, we're not able to listen.
Well, and interesting, as I unpack triggers and you work through the remote control exercise and you follow the thread that these emotions are connected to, you realize that they're actually a lot more logical than you think.
Exactly. They just are not logical based on potentially the present day circumstance.
Yeah.
But they have a thread that's going through it that actually makes more sense than we realize.
Yes, absolutely. So even before I met you, I think it was really great because I was primed to recognize that, my emotions are trustworthy.
Yeah.
They're trustworthy to tell me what my heart is feeling at that moment.
They are.
And to ignore that and to stuff that is, I kind of was recognizing, probably not the best way to live life.
Yep.
Probably got me into this spot.
Yeah. It's really self-judgment, how we interpret our emotions, our motive of our emotions. Or that's what we're really doing. We are saying that there's a motive to our emotions to actually hurt us or to cause us suffering, versus recognizing that they're actually trying to help us take care of the wound that we are every day suffering with, whether we're conscious of it or not.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it takes that trustworthiness to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
really not even just like being like, all right, like, I'm hearing what you guys are saying right now. Maybe there's some, value to this, but actually like honoring, respecting. I mean, you don't hear that very often. Respect your emotions, honor your emotions, listen to your emotions. I mean, I very rarely ever hear that. But we do hear, like we were just talking about, all the things that our emotions are doing to us instead of for us.
No, that's awesome. Honor them, respect them. I like that. So recently you shared that this subject of feeling your emotions has been coming up a lot in your one-on-one consulting sessions, which is
Yeah.
part of the reason why we thought this would be a good, maybe there's something in the air, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
in what ways has it been coming up? In what ways that you can share? Like, how has this been coming up in
Yeah.
your one-on-one sessions?
Yeah. So, doing the remote control exercising, exercising does feel like exercising, but doing the remote control exercise, being able to be aware of our triggers, being able to bring compassion, being able to do the whole process of the compassion method actually begins with feeling our emotions. And to some degree, because I've been doing this for so long, I kind of just expect people to be able to connect to their emotions because that's what I help people do. But recently, I've noticed that like we're starting from ground zero with many people. Like they're looking at me with like this blank face of like, I have no idea. Like I'll say, well, how'd that make you feel? Like in the remote control exercise, it talks about reaction emotions. I'm like, what were your reaction emotions? They're like, what is that? Like they don't even understand
Hmm.
that. Even like anger. They're like, but what does that mean? And I'm like, kind of like, it's anger. You know what I mean? Like it's like a weird like thing because you just think people automatically know what their emotions are. But multiple people recently have been saying, I don't even know what you mean right now. I don't even know what those emotions are.
Hmm.
Either they're numb in them or just so unaware that they don't really know what they're feeling. One client even described it as my mind just goes completely blank and I'm doing things and I'm saying things and I'm reacting and I'm completely unaware of it, like disconnected from it. And I'm like, wow, like that's like almost like a disassociation happening because we're so disconnected from our emotions that we're not even able to feel them in the moment. So we went back to like ground zero, and I stepped outside the trigger that we were working through and I just brought a more neutral topic up for them. Just, okay, what would you feel about this? And we just kind of walk through without the emotional charge of the really big trigger we were trying to identify. I just brought it down to something more basic that they'd be able to connect with. And being able just to say, okay, how would you feel if someone didn't call you back? And we went through and we just talked about those emotions and talked about the experience and talked about what they're feeling, but in less of an identifying way and more of just like an experience, kind of like tell me your story. And then they were able to, as they were able to have that space, they were able to start to articulate what they were feeling. But it's kind of interesting when you don't have a grid for it, because it's like if somebody doesn't know what flowers are and you're trying to describe what flowers are, it's difficult because they have no grid for it. And so that's just something that's been coming up more often. We've had to go back and just say on a very basic level, what does that make you feel? So it's more of a discovery even than a teaching.
So it's kind of like, your heart, if emotions are your heart speaking to you,
Mm-hmm.
and in this case, this person knows, let's say, English, but it's Chinese that the heart is speaking, because it's just
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah. Oh
confusing to
yeah,
them.
definitely. Yeah. Nothing, no grid.
So just talk a little bit more about how because this was one of the questions I want to ask you, is how do you begin to help people feel their emotions? So here you're starting really remedial. So just
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit more about that again.
Yeah. And so one thing that sometimes happens when you go to like traditional like therapy or counseling, they really want like there's like that feeling wheel, which is helpful. And I recommend actually like looking up, different emotions to be able to almost even be like to your heart, like, heart, do you feel this? Do you feel this? Do you feel this? Because then your heart can say yes, no, and you can kind of get a better understanding of what you're feeling. So that is a good place to start. But one thing that I say when I work with clients or when I'm teaching others to work with clients is that you don't have to necessarily have an emotion connected to it. It's okay just to describe a thought. It's okay to describe sometimes feelings, emotions aren't just going to be on that emotion wheel. So just being able to say, like, whatever comes to your mind, like, open it up, make it a lot more loose. It doesn't have to be an emotion. It can be a concept. It can be just a thought process that is actually connecting us to our hearts, even though it doesn't classify as an emotion.
One of the things that I think blocks people from feeling their emotions as well is that they don't know that there's going to be any comfort there.
Yep.
Because, in their early childhood development, if they had a big emotion, there wasn't comfort. Perhaps
Yeah.
they were shamed, and then, worse, not only was there not comfort, it led to separation. So it's
Yeah.
like a double whammy. So it's just like pain stacking on top of each other.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, as I've learned this process, that I kind of let my heart experience is that, hey, now we know. Like we have tools we didn't have then.
Yeah.
And one of the things that my heart knows, and sometimes it just sees a glimpse, but it knows that there is hope.
Yeah.
That there is hope for comfort, that there's no pain so great. There's no pain. I mean, no pain. Think about all the pain sources.
Yeah.
And when your heart knows that there's no pain so great that it can't find comfort, some of those things that would cause anxiety to just come up, because you're like, if that happened, how would I ever find comfort? Like there is no comfort if something like that happened. And now my heart knows, well, actually there is. It won't be easy.
Yeah.
It won't be enjoyable, but it knows that there is hope for comfort.
That's really good.
And I think that is a common thing that would prevent people from wanting to experience their emotions.
Yeah, definitely. I fully agree with that, because the hopelessness of feeling an emotion that you never feel like you're going to get comforted from is too big for us to do. And so we have to shut it down and disconnect and disassociate from what we're feeling.
And that really was apparent to me. I was talking to someone the other day that had this particular trigger that they just are avoiding doing this particular activity because this trigger is so great.
Yeah.
And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I just said, your heart does not know that in that scenario that there is hope for comfort.
Yeah.
And I said, you'll know that you're ready for that when your heart knows. And it doesn't have to know like 100%.
No, it can be little bits at a time until you feel safe enough to know.
When your heart can see a sliver, a flicker, in the distance, that, this is really hard, but there is hope for comfort.
Yeah.
Then you're ready.
Yep. I think that's a great way to describe it, and brings a lot of hope just even hearing it.
Yeah. One of the other things you talk about is sometimes when you're working through the remote control process and you get to, you feel the big reaction emotion.
Yeah.
And then you kind of sift through that and don't rush through the big reaction emotion. I think that's the temptation I have in the remote control exercise, is to rush through the big reaction and just get right to, like, let's get right to fixing this,
Yeah, exactly. These are just reaction emotions. Let's get to the tender emotions. Yeah.
No. So I got to feel the reaction, and it's hard to feel the reaction because usually the reaction is shame. Like you snapped, you were angry, you did something shameful, what I'm saying, what's perceived as shameful, but it's important to feel the reaction.
Yeah.
And then as we sift that down to that softer, more tender emotion, and then as we're thinking through what we need, a lot of times you talk about, like, how old do you feel in this emotion? Because the bigger your trigger, the younger your heart is feeling.
Yeah.
Am I saying this right? The heart.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. So, and then you talk sometimes about maybe sometimes you identify an age, but you can't maybe connect to a feeling at that age. And you talk about how sometimes it's good to do, you call it like a reverse linear, like you kind of go back to an age where you actually could feel like maybe there's a memory that you should have been scared, but yet when you think of yourself as a 5-year-old, and let's say that's how old you feel, you can't feel the scared. But you say, go to a time when you can feel the scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just maybe,
Yeah. So even like the example of having plumbing issues or sewage issues, when I first, bought a house, that was very overwhelming to me. I could go back to that feeling and feel what I felt at that time. And I could actually apply it, which is this more like linear than reverse linear. But then I could apply it to right now, today. How do I really feel? Am I still connected to those emotions, or did I really work through it? And I could be able to identify what it felt like 3 years ago versus what it feels like today, to be able to see if there's any more pain there that I'm numbing or not being connected to. So in a similar fashion, you could go back to, even if 0 to 12 years old, which is our early childhood development, we don't feel an emotion connected to certain ages because, just like you were just saying, our child self did not believe comfort was going to come, so they shut down their emotions and stopped feeling them. But let's just say we felt a lot as a teenager, which is very common. You don't feel a lot as a kid because it's not okay. And then all of a sudden you have all those hormones coming and, that whole brain development as a teenager. And all of a sudden you're feeling really big emotions. So I could go back to what I was feeling as a teenager, even though technically that's not my early childhood development. I could feel what I felt as a teenager and I could bring that back to when I was little. Because whatever I'm feeling as a teenager is magnified of what I felt when as a child. You'll always find a similar, I call it a thread, a similar thread that goes through our whole entire lives, even though certain parts of our lives are going to be shut down and certain parts of our lives we're going to have been able to feel. If we can kind of connect the dots from present day, what we're feeling right now, because whatever you're feeling right now, as far as the trigger goes, as far as when our amygdala is activated and we're in our fight or flight, whatever you're feeling now is exactly what you felt then. The only difference is the circumstances and our age and our environment is different, but the emotion will always be the same. And that makes it so much more real versus just trying to imagine what my 8-year-old felt if this, problem had been, happening then, of feeling potentially, I used to feel more out of control and, the house didn't work correctly. And I felt like I had to do all on my own. And being single, not having a spouse, I felt like it was kind of the similar of not having a dad be there, or not having a mom be present with me. So feeling all those emotions today, if I actually connect with them and not numb them, when I actually feel them, I'm like, oh, and I can feel it right now. Some of those feelings are there and I can feel them back when I was little. No help was coming. So you stop feeling because there's nothing is going to come and help comfort that feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, wherever you're numb is usually where you're feeling feelings that you need to go back to connect with.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And one thing I want to do, I think this is a good point to do it. We've been kind of on I would say the heavier side of emotions, talking about how the emotions
more
are
pain and more,
connecting to pain and unmet need. But there's another side of emotions, because
Yes,
not
there is.
only do they connect us to pain and unmet need, they also connect us to joy.
Joy. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So there's this adage out there, and I wanted to ask you about it. And I want you to explain how this adage is all wrong. Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
Here's the adage. It says, people will say, don't let the highs get too high and the lows too low.
That sounds like a protector.
That's definitely a protector. So how come that adage is all wrong?
Again, not to keep emphasizing what you just said, but if we feel really big emotions, or we feel very, low emotions, then, or like big as in like joyful, excited emotions, or very low, painful emotions, and no one was going to be with us in it, we feel safer when we neutralize. We feel safer when we keep everything balanced, and we don't feel too much. Because if we feel too much, we actually are going to tap into pain, like especially feeling too excited about something. And that's going to tap into an expectation not being met. Like people don't want to get too excited about going on a trip because it's not going to be what they wanted it to be. So they keep their expectations really low. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I'll lose my bags,
So they're protecting themselves. And if they can do worst case scenarios, and if they can not expect anything good to happen, then it'll keep them safe from feeling the pain of disappointment, feeling the pain of things not working out. So we can keep everything neutral. We're not excited about anything. We're not upset about anything. But again, that's coming back to that numbing and that protector that says you can't feel big emotions because they're going to overtake you, not even just painful emotions, but joyful emotions. And I think in a lot of ways, that's why our parents, when you were talking about how joy wasn't even acceptable in your early childhood development, was because parents were scared that you would become too joyful. And when you think about it now, like as I'm saying that, I'm
like they're
that's-
trying to protect you from the pain
yeah,
that's
no,
going to
exactly.
come around the corner.
Yeah. Because then you're going to get disappointed, and they don't want you to be disappointed. So they'd rather take you down, or take your joy down, and again, neutralize, to protect you from the hurt of disappointment. But I commonly say, set your kids up for disappointment on purpose. I know that sounds harsh, and that sounds like they're contrary to what we're supposed to do as parents, but you want your kids to learn how, in early childhood development, to learn how to accept disappointment and know that they're going to be okay even if they're disappointed.
That there's hope there.
There's hope there.
In the disappointment.
Yes, exactly. It's not the end of the world. It's not defining your story. It's not saying that this will be forever. It's just saying in this moment, something didn't work out the way we wanted it to work out, and that hurts. But it's okay to hurt. It's okay to get your hopes up. I feel that often, get your hopes up. Why do we not get our hopes up? Because we're scared of the pain that will come because we don't know how to process disappointment.
Well, I see so many people being held back from, if they think about their true self characteristics, I see so many people in life being held back from experiencing who they truly are because of that fear of disappointment.
Yeah.
Because they're feared of not fail, their fear of failure, their fear of all those other things. And it's like, when you can embrace like what you're talking about, you recognize that those are very instructional. You learn so much. Like I listened to this podcast I've mentioned on here a few times. I mean, it is next to Triggered and True, of course, it is my favorite podcast.
Of course.
Yeah. And it's called Founders, and it's called Founders, and it's all about history's greatest entrepreneurs. Yeah. And the common theme with all these folks was disappointment, failure. Yeah. And they didn't stop. It didn't scare them. It didn't do whatever. So they were, they were raised a little differently maybe than the next in that area.
Yep, exactly.
But neurologically, you've talked about this a lot in the past too, is like, if we want to talk about like the brain science that's going on here.
Yeah. So the same circuit in our brain that we feel pain is the same circuit in our pain that we feel joy. So when you feel joy, it can actually activate pain. And sometimes even when we feel pain, it activates joy. That's why people cry when they're happy. They're joyful. They're crying because they're so happy. It's releasing that same circuit, even though it's joyful crying, it's still connected to crying. And so many times we feel a big burst of joy on a neurological level, but either we control it ourselves or it teaches us based on the pain that comes up with the joy. The joy is a dangerous feeling to feel. Because if you feel joy, you're going to feel pain. And so on a neurological level, we're numbing it. We're numbing our joy because of the consequence of the pain that it ends up connecting to. But if we're not scared of pain anymore, and we know pain is just an indicator that we have a wound, then when we feel pain come up connected to joy, instead of pushing it back down or pushing joy back down to push pain back down, we're going to open up pain so we can stay connected to joy.
Yeah. And that was really powerful for me to learn, that not only was I suppressing my pain, I was also suppressing my ability to experience joy. And I recognized how much of life was being robbed from me. By myself. No one's doing this to me. I'm doing this to myself. I'm
those protectors, those safeties, that shutoff valve. That's trying to protect you. Too much joy, shut it down, because if not, it's going to connect to pain, and we're not going to be able to overcome that because no comfort will come. Yeah. So our system is constantly doing that. That's why when people have success, a lot of times it scares them more than failure. People get money, it scares them more than being poor.
Yeah.
Because it's connected to that joy that they've been so strategically
keeping
in balance, never wanting to feel too excited about something because it's going to be taken away. It's going to be connected to pain.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that in the psychology of money episode, where we talked about, how money can be a stand-in, a protector, which is like a stand-in for the gifts. Yeah. And for a lot of people, like money can be a stand-in for protection. So let's say they get a bunch of money. Well, you're like, oh, they should be joyful. No, now there's the fear that they're going to like lose it.
Oh no, totally.
And it's like, but it's in the bank. Well, we just had some bank failures, and there's always something.
Like, no, there is always something
it's like,
that keeps us from being able to feel safe in it.
And this is planet Earth. And here's the
Mhm.
reality. Safety
Yep.
will never be found in our external world.
No, it
No
will
matter
never
how
be found.
we
Mm-mm.
can probabilistically put ourselves in the best chance for success, like
Yeah.
by having your stuff in a FDIC insured, you can do all these things, the best
Yep.
probability for success, but there is no safety to be
Mm-mm.
found in our external world.
No, and that's why internally we have to have the gift of
Yes.
protection, because money will never make us feel those intimate, connected feelings of protection that was meant to come from a caregiver. Money is not a caregiver. Money is not comfort.
To kind of land the ship today, I think I wasn't planning on this, but as we were doing it, I thought, okay, and I was fighting a little bit. I'm going to share like a personal testimony because I think this is a way to land it.
Yeah, I would love that.
But I got to get through it. Okay. So I want to
Take your
talk
time.
about, and I think my goal in sharing this is for people to find hope in these emotions that at first seem so scary. And I hope this brings hope because I'm going to share an example of a personal emotion and thought that was so scary that turned into being precious.
Mm. Yeah.
It's like it transformed.
Mm.
And so in episode 18, I shared my great awakening and what really kind of was the triggering thought, if you will, the triggering fear that really took the great awakening kind of to the level that it did was this fear that I would take my own life. And that fear was there based on, I was kind of a mess. And then I heard a story about someone that was a successful person in my mind that you're like, oh my gosh, that happened to them. That's what they did. Oh my God, is that happening to me? That's not what I want. But is this eventually going to get so painful, so out of control that is my only, that is what ends up happening. So that fear was so big. So recently I had a trigger and it happened at work. And in that trigger, I disappointed someone, or I perceived that I did. And actually, I kind of did, I suppose. A recommendation I made was disappointing to the client. And I was like, this was hitting me at a pretty deep level. And I was like, okay, I'm going to spend some time with this one because I'm not going to ignore this, So these big emotions are coming up on the inside, this anxiety, this frustration. So I sat with it. I got little with the feeling. I worked through the remote control exercise, and I came to the root of this was in a fear of disappointing others and a belief that I had the power to not disappoint people.
Yeah.
Like I had that power, like I had the control that I could actually make people happy. I could always make, not only some of the time, like all the time I could make them happy. And that it was my responsibility to make them happy.
Yeah. It's a lot of pressure.
That was a lot of pressure, right? But if I really think about it, the core of that fear that I had during the Great Awakening, of that fear of taking my own life, was really connected to a fear of disappointing others.
Yeah.
Because I looked at that as being the ultimate way to disappoint God. Like, no pressure. Like, hey, dude, you can disappoint God.
Yeah.
Like we have like
pressure.
That's a lot of pressure. All right. So I have the potential to disappoint God. And then especially I disappoint my family.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would just think when I was going through this, I'm like, oh my God, what would people think? And just the pressure that I had on myself. Well, anyway, as I was working through the remote control and as I was bringing comfort, I found myself running, not from, but back to the Great Awakening and the feeling that I had. Because that memory was no longer scary and the feelings were no longer uncomfortable. They were precious. And I wanted to feel them because I knew at the core of that, that fear of disappointing others was a little boy that believed a lie that he had that power.
Yeah.
And that pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew there was comfort there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had told me, I lose track of the years, 5 years ago, that I would ever run to that thought, I'd have told you you're nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Plumb crazy.
Yeah. So thought everyone's trying to avoid. And if anyone's ever experienced it, that's what they're trying to avoid. So the very nature of running towards it, not to get away from it, is contrary, but so powerful.
Yeah. And that's what gives me great hope too, that in every one of those scary, traumatic emotions, anxious filled, depression laden, whatever thing that comes up inside of you, that not only is there hope for comfort, there's hope that one day that you won't look at them as something you want to run away from.
No,
That
there'll
you
be
want
joy there. There'll be peace there. There'll be comfort and love there.
And the joy is that you know that there is comfort that can come.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the joy is.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's a
Yeah.
really very personal thing, and something that going through that process is so important. But I love how you shared the deeper side to it that a lot of people are afraid to share.
Yeah. Well, that is my hope and prayer for everyone that listens, is that they too will have that experience.
Yeah.
And that those big, scary emotions won't be something they have to run from their whole life. They'll get comfort, and then eventually they'll run to them. All right. Well, I told you that would be difficult.
It is difficult. I'm really proud of you for
I
sharing.
know that I'm a little triggered. You know how I know?
How's that?
I'm sweating.
There's a physical response
Yeah,
to
I
sharing
mean,
such
that's-
an emotional thing.
Yeah.
Emotions are very physical, mental, and emotional.
Yeah. And that is like my telltale sign that I'm triggered, is when I start to sweat. So
Yeah.
yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Well, anything you want to say in conclusion?
Just one last thing, and a little bit connected with what you just shared, of don't be afraid to feel your emotions. Our brain tells us if we feel our emotions, we're going to feel it. We're never going to stop, and comfort's never going to come. But it's okay to feel your emotions, and you can feel them incrementally. You can feel them in small doses if you need to. That's okay. But every time you feel and every time comfort comes, you start to build the knowing that comfort will continuously come. And also to encourage everyone that everyone can feel emotions. It's just something that you weren't educated and that you didn't have a caregiver helping you with. And potentially you experience shame, like we talked about. So it told you that these are dangerous emotions. Emotions are dangerous, that they're our enemy. But emotions are your friend. And they are a messenger trying desperately and passionately to help you be able to connect to your heart and to connect to love.
Yeah. And they speak a language that you just don't know.
Yeah. And it's just learning, like anything. Just tell your brain, we're going to learn about this. We can feel emotions. We can learn about emotions, just like we can learn about anything.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. As always, if you have questions or comments on this episode or any of our episodes, feel free to reach out via the link in the podcast notes. And thank you for being with us on this journey and a part of the process. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Triggered and True. We hope that you enjoyed it. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, go to triggeredandtrue.com, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and click Ask. And if you would like to learn more about the Compassion Method, be sure to check out the Compassion Method Master Course, which can be purchased at compassionmethod.net. And as a podcast listener, you qualify for a $50 discount, which can be obtained by typing in the coupon code podcast50. Again, that's compassionmethod.net, coupon code podcast50. Thank you again. Goodbye.